when companies are setting a strategy, they face a basic trade-off between activities that will drive their costs down versus activities that will increase willingness to pay. And one simple way to visualize and communicate the trade-offs that you're making is something called the strategic frontier. So let's just step back and talk about those two broad ways that companies compete. So you could take the McDonald's approach. You have a very low cost structure, which allows you to offer, $2 burgers. On the other hand, you could take the Del Frisco's approach. Del Frisco is a popular high-end restaurant in Boston. They take a variety of actions that drive up willingness to pay, and they can charge $15 to $16 for a hamburger. So in broad strokes, McDonald's drop the cost, Del Frisco's increase willingness to pay. Then the question often comes up, why don't you do both, right? Why don't you pursue this dual advantage where you have both lower costs than your competitors and higher willingness to pay? So, you take the McDonald's cost structure plus Del Frisco's willingness to pay, and you have dual advantage, AKA making money. And the reason for that is actually pretty straightforward, right? The kinds of choices that Del Frisco needs to make in order to drive up willingness to pay, beautiful real estate, lovely harbor view, is a lot more costly than a typical McDonald's layout. The ingredients, including wine. I mean, if you have $5,000 you want to spend on a bottle of wine, Del Frisco's can help you with that, versus McDonald's drinks, which are a lot less expensive. So the kinds of choices that tend to drive up a customer's willingness to pay also tend, on average, to drive up your cost structure. And one way to visualize this trade-off is using the what we call the strategic frontier, and it's very simple. So on the x-axis we have willingness to pay, and on the y-axis we have cost, and then we have a curve that shows the trade-off between those. And the key things to note is if you want more lower costs, typically you're going to have to sacrifice some willingness to pay, and conversely, if you want to drive up willingness to pay, typically you're going to have to incur higher costs. And so as a company, one of the choices you face is where do we position ourselves on this strategic frontier? And so, McDonald's obviously low cost, low willingness to pay. Del Frisco's at the other end of the curve, a restaurant like Legal Seafood, somewhere in between. So that's one choice you face. But, important in deciding where you want to position yourself is where are the customers and where are the competitors, right? So customers, like suppliers, face a choice. You want to go out to eat. Obviously, you'd love to have Del Frisco's quality with McDonald's prices, but that's not on offer. So you have to choose from the options available on the strategic frontier. So some customers will go there and some will go there. And, over time, you'll see customers will express their preferences as to where they want to eat. And oftentimes, by the way, these kind of groupings are assigned some name, a segment name. So, the fast food segment, full food service segment, and affluent gourmet segment. So, the first thing you have to take into consideration when you're choosing where you position yourself on the strategic frontier is where are the customers? No customers, no business. The other thing, though, you have to think about is where are the competitors, right? So, fast food segment, because so many customers are there, it attracts a lot of competitors. And therefore, even if there is a lot of, the market segment is quite large, if it's very intense competitively, it's less attractive than a smaller segment with fewer competitors. So what you're looking for on the strategic frontier is a lonely place, a spot where there are enough customers for you to make money, but few enough competitors that you don't have to give away some of that value that you've created. So let's just take an example from a different industry, video consumption. So at the low end, we've got streaming video. We'll talk about them later in the course. In the middle, we've got traditional theaters that show films. And what you see from this visualization is, at least at first glance, there's nobody up in that upper left corner, okay? And it turns out, indeed, there is a company up there, IMAX. Some of you will be familiar with it. IMAX has invested heavily in technology that allows them to provide a great experience, very good graphics, good sound, and so forth. They're available in about 1,500 to 2,000 theaters globally. And because they've made these investments that have driven up quality and customers' willingness to pay, they're able to charge about a 40% premium price relative to a traditional cinema ticket. And so what IMAX has done is they found a lonely place on the strategic frontier, okay? So it's not a huge market segment. I think they account for somewhere between 3 and 5% of the total North American market for ticket sales. but it's big enough to sustain a good business. And because of their early investments in brand and technology, and the fact that the segment isn't so large that 20 competitors could make money in it, those two factors taken together have allowed IMAX to stake out a position that's profitable and defensible. So again, when you're thinking about the strategic frontier and how to position yourself, think about the customers, but also the competitors. And the ideal spot is a lonely place on the strategic frontier.